It was early morning when the sheriff's voice cut through the chaos. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time. Please step back from the gate," he said, his tone firm but exhausted. Karen, standing there in her pastel robe and flip-flops, was red in the face, screaming like a lunatic. "No, I'm not stepping anywhere until you arrest him. He turned off my water. He's a danger to the neighborhood," she shrieked, arms flailing as if she were about to take flight. The deputy just raised an eyebrow and looked at me, then back at her, his face deadpan. "Ma'am, this is his ranch. That water line doesn't even connect to your house." I stood there, hands in my pockets, trying to keep my cool. Karen wasn't listening. She stomped her foot like a toddler denied their favorite candy. "I don't care. I use that water. I always have. He doesn't have the right to just turn it off." It was 7:03 a.m. The sun was barely peeking over the mountains, bathing my 30-acre ranch in a golden hue, while horses grazed peacefully in the distance. But here at the front gate, there was anything but peace. 2 cop cars sat behind Karen's old minivan, lights flashing, and a handful of neighbors stood by the fence in their pajamas, holding coffee mugs, watching with wide eyes. The sheriff turned to me, a little exasperated. "Do you want to press charges, Mr. Miller?" Before I could respond, Karen screamed. "He assaulted me with a wrench." I blinked. "A wrench?" I repeated. That was the last straw. My mouth opened to say something, but before I could, Karen lunged toward me through the gate. "Now, let me back up and explain how we ended up here. My name is Jacob Miller, a 41-year-old retired firefighter. After 20 years of running into burning buildings, saving lives, and doing everything you could think of, I decided I needed some peace. So, I bought this ranch in northern Arizona, far away from city life, where I could raise horses and live out my days quietly. At least, that was the plan. I wasn't married, never had kids, but I did have 2 dogs, Gunner and Sage, who kept me company. They didn't talk back, they protected the land, and best of all, they never called 911 because I turned off my own water line. You'd think that a ranch this remote wouldn't have HOA issues, right? Well, wrong. Enter Karen Brewster. She moved into the Sunset Ridge Estates subdivision a few years ago, a place built just a stone's throw away from my southern border. They marketed it as luxury rural living, which basically meant you were close enough to smell cows but not actually own land. Karen was in her mid-50s with bleach blonde curls, permanent sunglasses, and a thing for wearing high heels in the dirt. She called herself the president of the Sunset Ridge HOA, but let me tell you, it was just a title. There was no real HOA, just a Facebook group and a handful of bored neighbors pretending to be in charge. For the first year, we kept things civil. She'd wave at me from her white SUV when she passed by my gate, and once, she even brought me muffins. I didn't eat them. Then things started to get weird. It began when she asked if she could borrow my private well water to fill her koi pond during a drought. I politely declined. Big mistake. She came back a few days later with a folder full of printouts, claiming some kind of legal right from a map she'd found online. I laughed it off, told her to talk to my lawyer, and figured that'd be the end of it. But then she started walking across my land without permission, poking around my irrigation system. That's when I had enough. I installed security cameras and a reinforced gate, thinking that would be the end of it. But what I didn't know was that Karen had been sneaking a hose under my fence, tapping into an old side spigot I hadn't used in years. It fed into one of my barns, but I had shut it off after replumbing the system. Somehow, she'd reconnected it and was using it to water her lawn, my water on my land. So, I did what anyone with common sense would do. I turned off the main valve and capped it. The next morning, Karen showed up at my gate, screaming like a banshee. "I have a right to that water. It runs through the land we share," she hollered. I stood my ground. "We don't share land, Karen. This is my ranch. Your subdivision is over that fence." She pointed at my water meter like it was some sacred relic. "You don't own the water underground," she argued. "I actually do. I pay to drill the well," I said. "The pipe you're using is my private line." She turned redder than a tomato. "That's theft. That's tampering with a utility." I rolled my eyes. "It's not a utility. It's my well," I said, not feeling like entertaining this anymore. That's when she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. I'm reporting a crime, she said, glaring at me like I'd just set her house on fire. Hello. Yes, there's a man tampering with water lines, and he threatened me with a wrench. I feel unsafe. Please send help. By the time the cops arrived, Karen was sobbing at the gate, wailing about elder abuse and public access to water. The deputies didn't seem too impressed. Ma'am, he owns this property, one of them said, the younger one pointing out, your house is in a different subdivision. But Karen wouldn't let up. There are frogs in distress, she wailed. That's when things really started to get out of hand. She claimed I assaulted her with a wrench. The wrench that was in my truck, untouched. I'd used a valve key, not a wrench, to turn off the water. But Karen wasn't backing down. I want him arrested. You're not doing your job, she screamed. The sheriff sighed, clearly exhausted from this circus. Ma'am, step away from the gate. She ignored him, stomping toward the gate, reaching through the bars and lunging at me. That's when there was a crack. The sound wasn't from a punch or a hit. It was the sound of Karen's knees slamming into the bottom metal rail of my ranch gate. She collapsed backward, screaming in agony like she'd just been hit by a truck. My leg, you broke it, she screamed, rolling around in the gravel like she was auditioning for soap opera. The deputies rushed to her, looking more annoyed than concerned. Ma'am, you hit your leg on the gate. No one touched you, one of them said. I want him arrested, she screamed, pointing at me with a trembling finger. I stood still the entire time, just watching. No, sir, I didn't touch her. My security cameras caught everything. If you want to review the footage, I'll be happy to show it to you. Karen's eyes widened, and I knew then that she realized the jig was up. But instead of backing down, she switched tactics. My brother's an attorney, she said, wobbling to her feet, her dramatic performance starting to wear thin. And he's going to sue you for violating state water sharing laws. I nearly laughed. Is that before or after he reads the part of the deed where it says this is private ranch property with private utilities? She stormed off toward her minivan, muttering curses under her breath. But I knew this wasn't over. No, this was just the beginning. Let me back up again. Karen hadn't always been like this. When she first moved in, she was friendly, even helpful. She baked cookies, hosted book club meetups, and handed out flyers about neighborhood cleanup days. But over time, those little favors turned into expectations. She assumed she could borrow things without asking. She let her grandkids onto my pasture like it was a public park, spooking my horses and almost getting them kicked. When I told her to ask for permission next time, she pouted and said, "You're not very community-minded, Jacob." I thought it would blow over. Big mistake. Then she started leaving passive-aggressive notes in my mailbox, claiming things like, "Your horse droppings are seeping into our air, and the way you trim your trees affects our property values." It got worse from there. I found the hose. A clear plastic garden hose running under the shrubs, leading straight to her backyard, where a sprinkler system was quietly humming away. I cut the hose, capped the spigot, and called it a day. The next morning, there was a note duct taped to my gate. "You're not the only one who needs water. Shame on you. The HOA will be contacting you." That's when I knew I had to act. I called my lawyer, David Holloway, who had been my buddy from my firefighter days. When I told him the story, he laughed for almost a full minute. "She used your water without permission and then threatened you? Jacob, this is textbook trespass and theft of resources. You're in the clear." He drafted a cease and desist letter, which I had hand-delivered. Karen didn't take it well. She got louder. She printed flyers warning others about my dangerous behavior, accusing me of hoarding natural resources and trying to monopolize the land. But here's the thing. Her home wasn't even on my property. Her subdivision wasn't connected to my well. The only thing connecting us was that damn hose. Still, Karen wasn't satisfied. 2 days before the water incident, she showed up again, this time with a clipboard and a measuring tape. She stood at the edge of my ranch, muttering numbers to herself before declaring, 2 feet of your fence is technically HOA land. I couldn't help but laugh. Karen, unless the state redrew the lines overnight, you're wrong. That was 2 days before the water valve incident, and when I turned off the old line she'd been using illegally, everything exploded. It didn't stop there either.